PhD in biophysics and a background in sustainability. I'm a managing partner and a consultant at the Inceptory, sustainability-led innovation firm. And it was founded by, by women, we're a women-led team from multidisciplinary backgrounds, and we bring into the picture experience from innovation, business, science, and technology. We work with organizations from various sizes, various industries, and work with them together to try to implement resilience, which we believe is actually integrating social and environmental value as core business imperative. So let's kick off today's session with the fact that we're all aware of unprecedented rise of economic prosperity. We live really well globally. If you see here, these indicators on the left are key socioeconomic indicators. And some might say, well, they're also indicators of prosperity and well-being, such as growth in population, production of food, energy consumption, transportation, and international travel. And on the right-hand side, we also see other indicators that are key Earth system trends. From all of them, we see an interesting trend. We see an exponential growth. So the time of around 1950s, after the Second World War, and you can see it marked in a red line, that's where the accelerated growth began. And you can see the same exponential rise in those key Earth system trends, such as emissions in greenhouse gases, such as ocean acidification, pollution from nitrogen for fertilizers, marine fish capture, and in general biosphere degradation. So while the human beings are experiencing prosperity and growth, the rest of the indicators for the planet are declining. And here is the challenge. How do we decouple our growth of prosperity from the detrimental impacts on the planet and all life on it? And indeed, all the visual and scientific evidence points to the unprecedented impact that our activities have on the planet, to such an extent that the scientists termed this epoch Anthropocene, the epoch of humans, whereby we have impacts on atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, everywhere on this planet, far in the atmosphere and down in the oceans. So, how do we do it? Well, in 2015, 196 nations came together and reached an unprecedented agreement. It's called the Paris Agreement. And during the Paris Agreement, it was agreed by all these nations that we have to lower our emissions and mitigate climate change by reducing or keeping the global temperatures heating to below 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees maximum. At the same time, the United Nations brought about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are a framework, the action tools that show us how can we reach those unprecedented agreements. This is the first time in human history that such global agreement and such plan for social economic development as well as this planet development were agreed upon. So while we are at it, where we are today, 8 years into this kind of process and this agreement. Well, the IPCC report, the International Climate Change Organization set up by UN many years ago, it's tasked with a role of looking into all the climate science and sharing with us all their findings. And so the recent report was released in 2021 and 2022. And what did they find is that from 1850 until 2022, we've emitted globally about 2,500 gigaton of carbon into the atmosphere. You can see it with in the gray circle. They also found that in order to be able to limit the global warming, we have a certain budget for carbon. And this you can see in orange. So in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, with 50% likelihood, we can emit only 380 gigaton of carbon until the middle of the century, 2050. It moves up to 1.7 degrees by 2040 and 2 degrees by 2052. This essentially means that we need to peak our emissions as soon as possible and reach net zero by 2050. What does it mean to humanity and business? Well, it means that on average, we have to reduce emissions between 3 to 5% per year. And if we want to stay within the 2 degrees global heating, the reduction needs to happen by 25% by 2030 and 45% by 2030 if we are to limit it to 1.5 degrees with 50% chance. Yeah? So this is no small task. And how are we about to achieve it? That's a big question. What is very clear, though, from IPCC report is that Agenda 2030 and conventional growth are essentially incompatible. We cannot continue our current ways of development if we are to achieve these goals. And this statement is not mine. A much smarter and greater people came up with it. And research from the Stockholm Resilience Center that included scientific community, global scientific community, representing also Africa and Asia, participated in this research, whereby they used data, currently available data, and modeled it to see what are the potential paths for humanity to go forward from now to 2050 and beyond. So at this point, I invite you to take a moment and to see how you feel, to feel what you feel with regards to climate change, everything that is happening. So in some forums, when we ask such questions, people say that they feel anger or concern or grief for a lost life. And some others say that they're very hopeful and they're cautiously optimistic and they see possibilities of what new things we can invent as species. In other forums, people also say, well, I don't think it's a problem, or it's not my problem. Or they will say, you're the problem. Or they think that some sort of new technology, magic bullet, will save us, or the invisible hand of markets will save us. Well, all these feelings are normal and they're all acceptable. It just shows we're humans. We cannot control our feelings. But it also doesn't mean that we should sit, calmly from the side and watch how everything deteriorates and how our livelihoods and our planet is being destroyed. We should remain calm, but also take action. So let's talk about what kind of action we can take. So those scientists from Stockholm Resilience Center came up with 4 potential available to us trajectories for development. How we can bring together the development, the socioeconomic development that we need to have within planetary boundaries. So on the x-axis you see the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. How can we achieve them while remaining in the safe space of the biosphere of the planet? And the 4 scenarios are, well, the first one is the same. We continue doing the same business and economic activities as we have done so far from the beginning of Industrial Revolution. The second one is faster, that we continue on the path of growing economy, only doing it faster. The third one is, well, let's work harder, which means we just put everything we have into achieving the SDGs. And the fourth scenario is let's work smarter. This scenario tells us that what we need are transformational policies, bold and transformational decisions. Let's look a little bit closer into the same kind of scenario. What is happening? Business as usual. Well, governments, politicians, businesses, NGOs, and civil society all work towards achieving SDGs. And they really intend to do their best. And they do. There are millions of people lifted from poverty. There's a lot of investment happening in new technologies and their commercialization. There's also a lot of investment in, we're seeing now, digitalization and robotization. What is also happening under such scenario is increased inequality. And with increased inequality, there is higher civic unrest. And with that, there is no chance of achieving SDGs because we cannot fulfill on the goal of sustainable development. We cannot fulfill on reduction of the climate change impacts, and we cannot fulfill on the prosperity for all on this planet. The conclusion is that the policies and our approaches from the 20th century are not fit for the 21st century and the goals of sustainable development. The second scenario talks about faster. We just do faster what we've been doing so far. The focus is still economic and business growth first. We bring everybody on board, and we do initially not too bad. The GDP will grow about 1% initially, and particularly so for the poor countries, while growth will stagnate for the more developed countries. But altogether, what we're seeing is the same policies that are being used. So we increase trade, we put more investment into technology, and the outcome is, well, a little bit better, but at the end of the day, we still transpass many of the planetary boundaries. We cannot mitigate climate change to the way we want, and this is the outcome of this faster pathway. The harder pathway. Everybody actually finally follow up from the talk on sustainability to action. Businesses, governments, and civil society come together, and everybody doing their best again. There are more social and financial resources allocated to tackle these challenges. Everybody working about 30 to 50% harder. And it also pays off. However, the problem is that every SDG is tackled separately. And the focus is on trade-offs. Well, do I invest money in education, or do I invest money in clean water? Do I invest money in agriculture, or do I invest money in technological development? So these trade-offs, what happens is that we're unable to achieve some of the very important SDGs, such as, again, mitigation of climate change, but also the life on the planet and underwater are harmed. There is another way, and that way is, of course, to work smarter. The work smarter is when transformational policies are put in place. where everybody come together to tackle the challenges. Really transformational, where the rules of economic activities and social ways of being are changed and transformed. There will be they found that there are 5 leverage points that can be acted on. The first one is investment in renewable energy, such that we're able to halve our emissions every decade. The second one is investment in sustainable food production. The third one is new developmental models for poor countries. The fourth is technology that is equitable and climate sensitive. And the fifth is investment. Again, that is environmentally and climate sensitive investments. Under these circumstances, if we act, we are able to achieve most of the SDGs, 15 out of 17, and we're able to remain within the safe planetary boundaries to continue prospering. So, I love that scenario. I feel really inspired. We, as human beings, are well positioned to choose to pursue that fourth scenario because we are cognitively most developed species. We've put in place amazing, unbelievable social structures. We surely are up for the task. And what will it take to reach net zero within planetary boundaries? Well, they suggest 3 areas, of course. One is the self. We need to realize that it is all our doing, for good and bad. We need to shift our mindsets and values, particularly in countries where there's high consumption and high emissions. And we have to change our behavior within the current system. For the private sector, this means that when talking about reduction in emissions, we need to be looking at abatement of real emissions, actual emissions. We have to make sure that our business strategy is sustainability strategy, and sustainability strategy is our business strategies. And this means we need to start looking into sustainable business models. And we need to make sure that investment flows into the right directions. For policymakers, this means that we need to have transformational change measures for alternative economic growth, the technological investments that are equitable and climate sensitive. We need to have policies in support of inclusion and social equity. And we do need to make global partnerships for governance of planetary boundaries. So, the action on self is very important, and we all have to do it. But it is not sufficient. And we understand now that the rate of change and the kind of transformation that need to happen on the political level is something unprecedented. And many of us can still find ways to contribute in that element, but let's focus on what the private sector can do, because I'm assuming this is why you're here today. I invite you to consider these questions. These are just some questions, not all, and they're not comprehensive questions. How might we meaningfully contribute to lowering emissions, regenerating ecosystems, and contributing to equitable society? How can we build resilience in the changing climate that is already impacting all of us? What new business models will support the new needs of the society in the changing climate? And can the company be responsible for climate change? While you're thinking about these, let's focus on reducing emissions, because often when we talk about climate change, everybody talk about greenhouse gas emissions. And why? Because all our economic activities are dependent on them, because our economic activities are dependent on energy, which still mainly comes from fossil fuels. So Let's imagine that this bathtub are all historic emissions, all natural emissions, as well as the current day's anthropogenic emissions. And what we're looking to do is to reduce anthropogenic emissions. And the action on the global level that we need to take is those emissions reductions, as well as regenerating carbon sinks that are natural sinks that include oceans, forests, grasslands, wetlands, etc., and soil. On the level of organization, we need to look at, well, how do you reduce your emissions as an organization? But also, how do you help others within your value chain to reduce their emissions? And how do you act to regenerate or perhaps create newly those carbon sinks? And when we talk about it, well, we measure, let me go back for a second. When we talk about reducing emissions, we need to take a baseline first, and that baseline is measuring your carbon emissions footprint. In order to do that, we need to understand where these emissions come from. We usually talk about the carbon emissions as an equivalent because there are many other greenhouse gases and their climate heating potencies differ. So for ease, we recalculate and talk about carbon dioxide equivalents to do that. The temporary timeline for carbon footprint measurement is usually 1 year. And we talk about 3 scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3. The first scope refers to direct emissions, which are coming directly from your business activities, such as maybe your company building and the company fleet of transport. The second one is the energy that you as a business purchase from suppliers, from providers. And scope 3 is the largest. These are indirect emissions that can occur upstream of your business activities as well as downstream of your business activities. And these include buying your office gear, but also buying machines for your manufacturing, purchases, transportation, extraction of raw materials, but also on the product level, the manufacturing as well as the use and throughout the span of life of the product you produced and the end of life. So if you're producing and installing air conditioners, for example, the use of the emissions from the use of these air conditioners is under your scope 3 emissions. And so your total carbon footprint will be the sum of all of those emissions. And usually many people kind of get really scared, that's a lot of work. And they want to know, how do we calculate? Well, first you need to understand where your emissions are coming from. And the act of doing that will help you to see what is the price of carbon that you're paying for every activity within your business. So we're looking to essentially decouple the activities from the carbon. And there's a relatively simple method actually for calculating carbon footprint. Right? Once you identify a certain item within the activity, such as, for example, you own trucks that run on diesel, right? And you identify that during a whole year, one truck uses 10,000 liters of diesel. This is activity unit. So how much of use from that unit you extract. And then you find emission factors that a little bit of work, might require a little bit of work, but they are available, some of them publicly available. And for diesel, this will be 3 kilograms of carbon per liter. So you multiply one by the other, and you get your greenhouse gas emissions per year, which would be 30 tons of carbon. And you do it for all the items in your organization, and when you sum it up, this will be your carbon footprint. So the methodology is well rooted in the ISO standards, and its implementation is provided by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So I invite you to go and read their very detailed explanations of how to do the calculations for it. Let's look then at one example, how, for example, a company can do it. I believe that, I know, not just believe, I know that not only we have the obligation of doing, calculating and reducing our emissions, but we can do it in such a way that it will be a win-win benefit, the multi-benefit solutions. And this is one of the examples I want to kind of share with you. Let's say this company, and call it New Zealand Builders. It's a fictitious company, but the project and the benefits from the project are actually real benefits. So we're talking about the period of economic downside for the world, 2008, 2009. There were lack of jobs, and the kind of construction and retrofit industry suffered. And the New Zealand government put in place a requirement for energy efficiency inside homes. So retrofit the boilers as well as insulate windows and the buildings. And indeed, what happened is there was a demand for such. There was this need and demand for such work. After a while, after this initiative was rolled out, what people living in homes that were retrofitted realized is that the hospitalization occurrences as well as their medical bills went down significantly. So what started happening is that they were healthier because they lived in warmer, cleaner, and lighter homes. And so with such an approach, we can have those multiple win-win situations whereby we were able to reduce the carbon emissions through energy efficiency, but we also were able to improve human health and grow jobs, because this was the initial intent. And it was such a successful initiative that the Health Ministry of New Zealand decided to roll out how it's called, but essentially they allowed and requested the medical practitioners to tell the patients that they can go, or they need to go and retrofit their homes, improve their homes, in order to improve their health. So I believe that this is a great opportunity for humanity, for business and economy, not only to prosper, but also do it within the safe boundaries of this planet. And when businesses think about projects for decarbonization, I invite them to think about those smart strategies whereby we can create the win-win situations for multiple stakeholders.